Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club, the Kids Club edition, my favorite club, because kids always get the best reading material. And this is for the month of, what even month is this? This is August. Yes, this is August of 2022. My brain. Welcome to everybody. We've got a great book this month, and it's really gorgeous and lush. And some pop up on our screen. It's all good. And the book is The Girl in the GLIM. And we are joined here by India Swift and Michael DOIG. Michael is off camera, so say something, Michael.
Something, Michael.
There you go. So they are our guests for this. Hey, how you guys doing?
We're doing good, thanks. Thanks so much for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You're coming in all the way from the UK, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Sweet.
Nice sunny day today in the UK. I've had to pull the curtains so that you're not dazzled by all the light coming in.
Nice. We got a sunny day in San Francisco too, so
sounds like every day in San Francisco.
Yeah. No, it's usually foggy here actually.
Really?
But it's San Francisco. Yeah. We even, our fog even has a name. It's called Carl the Fog.
How's Carl doing today?
Carl is in hiding today. Carl the Fog has a Twitter account, so you can actually sign up on Twitter to follow Carl the Fog, and you can find out all about fog in San Francisco.
I'm going to follow that.
All right, and that's how we start the conversation about comics. Yay! Very good. Well, I'm really glad to have you guys. I always start with the first question as the same for every show because I really like this question, and it's why comics? You particularly because I can see from your little bio at the back of the book that you guys are animators also. You work in animation. So what is it about comics that, because comics are a very work intensive, kind of isolated kind of making art. What is it about comics that makes you feel good, that makes you want to do them, as opposed to other kinds of art forms?
It's a good question, and there's not any one answer to it. The biggest reason is just because I love comics. I grew up on comics. They're a huge part of my life. I think it's an incredible art form and it's so much fun. And actually, it's funny you brought up the isolation aspect of it, because that's another reason why we actually decided to go into comics to tell this story, is because, like you said, we have an animation background. Animation is a very collaborative medium, and it's also very time-consuming. But it's time-consuming and collaborative to the point where it's very difficult to make something cohesive on your own without it taking, 7 years or something. So when we came up with the idea for the story and we're trying to figure out how we wanted to tell it, obviously our first thought was, well, we could animate it, but it would take so long to tell even the first part of the story. And we were like, what about comics? In comics, we can work together, just me and Mike. We can craft it to exactly the way we want it, and we can probably tell the story in a year or just over a year, making the book possible. So that's why.
Yeah, very nice. Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say that working collaboratively with Swift in that sort of duo kind of way, there's really appeal of we're not, and really craft a story that we believe in. And comics have always kind of been that heart of storytelling that's there is a really big appeal. When you're working in such a big collaborative way that you kind of have to adhere to the vision of those above you, whereas with comics, it's kind of like you in a room together trying to figure it out. Sure. And we both love story. So working in entertainment mediums, story is the most important thing to us. And comics feels like you're the closest to it.
It's the most direct line, between the creator and the creation, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are the first comics you remember doing, India?
Ever that I made?
Yeah.
Well, taking it way back, I used to make my own comics about my own Sonic OC character called Buffy the Cat, when I was like 9, and
Okay.
I had pages of them, and me and my friend Caroline used to do these comics together. So I just kind of grew up drawing them my entire life. But the first kind of semi-professional ones I did, there was something that DOIG and I made together when we first met, which was kind of our first collaboration, called Frostblight. And it was kind of like a long scrolling comic. It didn't have any dialogue. It didn't have any panels. It didn't even have any pages. It was one continuous like tapestry. And we were doing like a page a day, telling the story through the month of December, trying to get through 24 pages by the end to tell one cohesive story. And it was like our trial test for how well do we work together as a team. And after that, we made a short comic called North, which was like 8 pages. And then we were like, what the heck, let's dive straight into the 50-page Girl in the GLIM. And we actually self-published it to begin with and just made it off our own backs before it ever got picked up at IDW.
Yeah.
And then when they picked it up, they wanted the further 70 pages. So it developed into that. So that's kind of a history. So we're still fairly new to making comics.
Sure.
And I think our animation background kind of shows in the comics too. Like you can tell that we're kind of working out as we go. But honestly, I think that's half the charm, is getting to see the artist who's making the piece of work grow and evolve in their storytelling as you go.
Yeah. No, I always agree with that. The development, because comics are the great art form that you can see the artists develop over the course of stories. You can see as their style changes over their careers, and compare one book to another. It's really neat. Like I don't really feel like you get that from other art forms in that same kind of way, where you see the evolution that's happening on the page. Did I pick up there in both of your answers that you guys refer to each other as DOIG and Swift?
We do kind of, yeah, we do. Because we have like a little show that we do on Twitch every morning, and we kind of just it just became something that felt natural to call one another through that. So now we just automatically do it. So we've just kind of shortened ourselves to nicknames at this point.
That's adorable. I like that. What's the first comic that you remember reading that stuck with you? Like obviously you probably read some little kids comic or something, but what was the first thing that stuck with you that you were like, wow, comics are exciting and cool?
Do you want to go first with this one, DOIG?
Yeah, sure. I think growing up, my dad had these annuals and large collections of Calvin and Hobbes, and I just poured through those. I loved the humor and the sassiness of the characters in that. That really, like, I always loved the parts where you could go delve into Calvin's imagination, and it's almost like the worlds explode on the page, and I was like, whoa, like this is like what I'm seeing in my head, but this artist is putting on paper. I want to know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was the Fleetway Sonic the comics, which were the English run, which were very different from the Archie ones that you guys get in the States.
Right.
Like completely different characters, completely different story, completely separate writers, obviously. But that was my bread and butter growing up. And then the first comic that really stuck with me in terms of like, wow, this is the potential of storytelling, was reading Bone for the first time, which is just like a fantastic, epic, sprawling story, and it's got these very dark parts, but it's also got this great humor, and the characters are so rich and vibrant, and it kind of blew my mind that you could tell something with so much depth, with such kind of, I don't want to say they were simple drawings, but they were like, they were just what they needed to be. There wasn't a lot of complexity in them, but there was so much emotion and so much narrative being delivered. It was kind of like, wow, if you can do that with these like very simple characters, imagine what you could do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny too, because I'm sure you know this, that Jeff's background is also animation. He was an animator before he started doing comics as well, and so he's got that same kind of sensibility of how you squash and stretch the characters and how that thing works, which is a thing I definitely see in here as well. What would you say the main differences between doing like storyboards for the movies that you've done it for versus doing a comics page?
So it's a really good question. There's actually a lot of transferable skills and similarities, but the language is very different between the two mediums, and there are tools that are very specific to each medium. So pretty much when you're storyboarding, you're always going to be boarding to the screen size that you have, right? But in comics, you have panels, and how you lay out your panels and what shape panels you use and how you use page turns, that can change so much about how a story is told and how it's received by an audience and the feeling you get from it. Those are tools which you don't get in storyboarding. In storyboarding, you can control the timing because in general, we time out our boards and we choose when the cuts are and everything so that it plays kind of like a movie when you see it with your team. But in graphic novels, the reader is really the one that dictates the pacing because you can stop, you can go and look back over panels, you can choose when you want to turn the page, you can go back and check out things which happened before if you want to recap. So it's really interesting trying to learn to control what you can through the page and get those moments to land. Like when you deliver a big moment on a page turn, there's something so cool and satisfying about that and seeing the way that works. When you can try and force someone to slow down on a panel by making it larger or putting more detail into it, there's something so satisfying about that. And just like there's so much depth to how you can use these different storytelling tools. And I feel like I've only just scratched the surface with
Sure.
the GLIM. I'm still learning every day. Every day I do comics, I learn more about how you can use this incredible medium. There's so much to dive into with it. And the more people's books I read too, the more you can see so many people using them so differently.
Yeah.
Like, you read something like Watchmen, which is obviously much more adult, but for those who don't know, the artist who does that uses a 6-panel grid, or is it 9-panel grid?
9 panels.
Yeah, very frequently. But it doesn't limit the storytelling. It almost adds to it in a way because it's so much about what the intent of the author is.
Yeah,
and
to the point where when it goes from panel to row or wider panel, like that adds emotional weight to the minute, to the beat, because it has that beat. You can hear the beat behind it at all times.
You can feel the rhythm.
Yep.
And when it sets it up, and when it breaks it, it makes an impact.
Yep.
And it's like, I don't get that with Girl in the Glim as much because I like using panels very expressively. So all of my panels are like different sizes, different shapes. Sometimes they cascade down the page. And it's like, I'm getting a lot of expression out of that. But at the same time, it's not as easy to do something like set up a rhythm and then break it. So seeing all these different ways that different comic artists use these tools, like it's so inspiring. And it's something which is completely unique to comics.
Yeah. No, very much so. Very much so. Let me stick with the animation for just half a second because one of the things I don't know very much about animation at all. Actually, I know almost nothing. But it seems to me that when you're storyboarding, you're picking kind of what are they called, key frames almost of the story. But you were talking a little bit about time, right? So in an animated movie, in any kind of movie, the audience has no control over how things unfold. They can only receive. And so I guess what's the difference when you're storyboarding? Can you as the art, I don't know if this question is going to make sense. Do you as the artist feel that sort of lash of the clock that you have to always move things forward by roughly the same amount between panels, if you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I don't know if yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think I get what you're asking, and yeah, you absolutely do, and that's like its own skill. that is, again, it's something which is similar between the two, but you express it very differently between comics and storyboarding. But yeah, controlling the pacing is really tough, because when you're doing storyboards, any story you tell, you want it to have peaks and troughs, and you want it to have, you know, fast moments of build and excitement, and then slow moments of like peace and quiet, and, you know, sometimes sadness, sometimes calm. And figuring out how to pace that, you know, within the confines of the length of the episode or the footage is its own huge challenge. And it's one of the reasons storyboarding is so difficult and takes so long, is because you have to figure out, you know, where you want those moments to linger and where you want to really like race through them. So yeah, a lot of that is you just having to like be really aware of the kind of moment you're trying to create, and then pushing time to be shorter on the bits you want to like rush through, and pulling it out on those moments you want to hold on. Luckily, because it's such a collaborative medium in animation, and the teams are pretty huge, we have editors who will take the animatic, and, you know, sometimes, especially me, I'm kind of known for maybe boarding more than I should sometimes. So I sometimes go, you know, a minute over or 30 seconds over, and they'll find amazing ways to cut it down, which doesn't sacrifice the storytelling, you know, and that's its own skill as well.
Yeah,
yeah. In
absolutely.
comics, you kind of have to do all that yourself, so it's kind of like a crash course in storytelling, making your own comic, which is half of why it's so fun.
Yeah. So I guess the corollary question there is, do you feel that you're gonna be better at storyboarding because you've made comics? And do you feel that you're better at comics because you've done storyboards?
Yes, absolutely both, 100%. In fact, I kind of believe that anything you do in life feeds into anything else you do. You know, for example, just going out, having a walk around town, you see all kinds of interesting characters and body language. You hear all kinds of interesting dialogue between people that you can bring into your comics and storytelling, and it enriches your stories and your characters, just like being present to the world around you. And when it comes to comics and animation, they share a lot of DNA, and it absolutely trying to tell the story of Girl in the Glim has improved my storytelling in my boarding, and doing boarding has improved the way in which I draw and express those moments in the comics. So, I mean, sometimes people ask whether they're wasting their time pursuing something that isn't necessarily what they want to do. And I always say to them, if you're enjoying it, then just go for it, because anything you do is going to feed into the other stuff you do. Like any hobby that you have, anything that you're making, if it's not necessarily a comic, it doesn't mean it's not furthering your storytelling and your life experience that you can draw on when you then make the comics. And I always find that comics and animation and storyboards that are by people who have like lived and absorbed more in life, like there's more interest to them, because those people are drawing from more stuff in their own life. So yeah, it's like absolutely, like comics has made me such a better storyteller.
I love that answer. I love that answer. All right, we'll come back to sort of the technical stuff in a couple of minutes, but I know that a lot of the kids watching this don't have the patience to sit through some of that stuff. So we should talk about the book a little bit towards the top. And also, let me remind anybody who's watching at home, if you've got a question, you can either ask it in the chat, or you can post it to Facebook theoretically, though no one ever has. We've never actually done that, I don't think. Anyway, but you post in the chat, and we may ask your question during this thing, so you know we'll do it. But let me India, let me ask, what was the impetus of the book? Where did the book come from? What was the kernel of the idea?
I think it was the fact that when I was a kid, I didn't have like the best time at school. I went, and I was the arty kid. You know, I was a little bit of the outcast. I was kind of picked on for the way I looked and for the things I liked. So, you know, it started off with not such a great time. And luckily, I managed to find and make some friends along the way, and they made it a much better time. But when I was having a tough time in school, I would go home and I'd kind of escape into video games, or I'd escape into comics, or I'd escape into books. And none of them ever really reflected the feelings that I had of like loneliness. I never felt like there was really an authentic reflection of that in books. It always felt like it was very quickly glossed over. And so I think Gun the Glim is kind of me making that book for myself when I was a kid that I wish that I'd had, where, you know, we kind of sit with and address the fact that, hey, it sucks to feel that way, you know, and sometimes there isn't necessarily anything you can directly do about it. But hopefully through following Bridgette's story, kids who, you know, feel the same way I did will see that as she is herself and she comes out of her shell and she makes friends, that if you believe in yourself, you keep going and you're honest with who you are, like I promise you things will get better. And, you know, those years can be tough, but they're a temporary thing. And sometimes, you know, it gives you the feeling helpless in life is, I think, what gives you the impetus to try and help others. And I think that's really the core of Bridgette's character, is that she is sometimes made to feel helpless, but she is always someone who will try and help other people. And I think that's really important to hold up as like a shining beacon to kids and adults everywhere, which is the importance of empathy and, you know, doing what you can to make people's lives better, even when you're not necessarily in the best place. And also just how it's okay to feel sad about that and to acknowledge it, you know? So I think that's what it was. I think I wanted to make the book that I wish I'd had when I was a kid.
Yeah, that's kind of beautiful. I really like that. You know, and I want to say too that I think those feelings really are universal. You know, I think even the kids who look popular and happy all the time are often not, and they often feel lonely and alone and isolated. And sometimes that being popular, you know, is what they try to form their armor as, you know, rather than actually being happy and not lonely and feeling sad. It's kind of part of the human condition, and it's okay to feel those things, you know?
I agree. I think at the base core of everything, I think especially in school, everyone's just scared, you know?
Yeah.
Every kid is just scared they're not going to be accepted by the other kids. And I'd kind of delve into that a bit in the book, and I'm planning to, you know, push that a bit more and explore that a bit more in future books of GLIM as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's an important thing to let people know. Because when I was a kid, like, you grew up thinking that everyone else kind of had it like worked out and knew what they were doing, and you were the only one who felt like a mess and didn't know what you were doing and was scared all the time. But when you get to be an adult and you talk to other adults, you suddenly realize, oh wait, everyone's scared all the time. And it's like, it's not a great thing to be scared all the time, but it's also kind of beautiful because it's something that we can use to relate to one another. And when we can open up to others about that and be honest about the fact that we're nervous or scared about stuff, that's when you can make true connections with people and forge true friendships.
Yeah. No, I see that very much so. You said you had self-published the initial part of this. You kickstarted it. Am I right about that?
No, we actually didn't. We just went straight ahead. We're just like, we've never done this before. We don't know how to do it. So we ordered, I think it was 250 copies, and we took it to a local comic book festival called Thought Bubble, which is a really, really wonderful comic book festival in the UK. If you ever get to visit, then check it out because it's great and it's got a wonderful indie scene. And it did really well there, and that was like hugely encouraging. But yeah, we kind of made the book for Thought Bubble almost, because we came up with the idea and we were like, well, this is a personal project, and it always helps us if we have a deadline to work to, because it forces us to get it rolling and get it done. So we said, let's try and make it for Thought Bubble. So we got the first 50 pages done and we self-published it and took it there. And then when it did really well, we were encouraged by our friend Declan Shelby, who's another comic book artist, to send it to IDW. And they were interested. So they said, hey, can you make this 120 pages? Can you get us another 70 pages into this? And we said, yeah, absolutely, we can do that. So you can actually tell there's like a slight shift in the book in terms of the drawing style, where you can kind of see that maybe like a year's passed between, maybe a couple of years.
Is it literally the first 50 pages is
It
the
is.
original, and then okay.
Yeah, it is.
So you didn't go and like add a couple pages at the beginning or very cute. Okay.
No, we didn't. We did adjust a few things.
Uh-huh.
So this is the original. So it's a bit bigger.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's all in there. We adjusted a few things just because when we wrote the second part of the first book years later, there was a few things that didn't quite slot together that we were like, oh, okay, we need to adjust this to make it roll together properly.
Sure.
So we went through and just tweaked a few things. But yeah, in general, it's pretty much the same.
That's very cool. That's super
Yeah.
cool. How much time came between the first 50 pages and the back 70?
It was, how many years was it, Mike? Mike's good with time and organization, and I'm not. So
it's roughly 3 years.
3 years, I think.
Okay.
Which wasn't for want of trying. It was more just that animation work really took off and got very busy, and it was hard to find a gap between projects. I actually ended up making I made the comic at the same time as making the Mystic Crystal music video and directing that.
Wow.
And then also while storyboarding on the Rise of the TMNT movie that just came out.
Uh-huh.
So I was like frantically nights and weekends, working on this passion project to try and get it done. Yeah, we finally got it done, and it came out like a couple of months ago.
Yeah, and it's beautiful and wonderful and a lot of fun. Yeah.
We definitely had a lot of fun making it, and it's also like hugely lifted up by Mike's colors, which are phenomenal as always.
Yeah, so let's talk maybe about your guys' process in working. Do you write a script first, like a full script? Do you just go straight to doing kind of doodly little storyboards, thumbnails?
Yeah, I actually do. I know it's a bit unconventional, but I'm so used to visual storytelling that I find it very difficult to just write down pages of the dialogue and what I see happening, and then follow that and create pencils from it. So what I actually do is I tend to just go straight into thumbnails, and I thumbnail out what I feel is right. And if there's a part I'm not exactly happy with, then I will go back and redo it multiple times until I feel like it flows okay and the pacing feels okay. And then I'll go back in after that and I'll add dialogue to anywhere where I kind of felt it in my head that, then they're going to say something like this and she'll respond something like that. I'll put in some dialogue there, and I'll add dialogue anywhere where it feels unclear what the story is. And then from that, I will make an actual written script that we can send to our letterer, who
interesting.
on this book is Haas.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Wow. So that actually that's this is one of the things no, but I love this because I interview a lot of cartoonists. We're somewhere in the 250s, 260s, I don't know, something like that. And there's always one thing that any individual cartoonist tells me that they do that no one else has ever told me before. The idea that you're storyboarding and then you're writing a script. I've never heard that particular combination. I love it. That's fantastic. And it makes sense for the letter. Obviously that makes a lot of sense. But I've never heard it done that way. Are you when you're doing your thumbnails, you're doing them in sort of a page format, right? So that you can see how they fit on the page. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think we have some that we can show.
Yeah, we have that. We do. Let's bring it up.
Yeah.
We will. Here's the little presentation thing that you had us bring up. Okay. Go to the next page, Ben. What is there anything to comment on this? I don't know what.
That's just a t-shirt I'm wearing, but
cute.
That's all
cute.
right.
Okay, bring the next one then, Ben.
So these are some of the character designs. So it's not this one. If you want to keep going through some more character designs.
Those all look very animation-y to me.
Yeah, I think people open the book and they're like, "Are you an animator?"
Yeah.
Is it that obvious?
Yeah.
So this is all just research going into the different characters and how they would live and everything.
Yeah, like building their room so you can visualize it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like trying to figure out, it helps me to get in the head a little bit and to figure out the characters a bit more, to kind of feel out how they would live, how they would decorate a room, how messy or clean they would be.
Nice. Next one, Ben.
Here we go. So yeah, this is an example of some thumbnails which I was doing on Procreate on my iPad. So these are like very small when I do them, like probably only about that big on screen.
Yeah.
And you can see that I've like sketched in some like very loose, hard to read dialogue in there. So that's kind of like how I do it. And then when I go back through, I'll be like, okay, what do I actually want them to say? Like, can I write this in a way which is, appealing, that, has the character voice and everything? But I think I sent a couple of these through, and you can see that each one, I'm trying a different layout for the final page. So that's an example of me like trying to figure out, like, I'm not happy with this. What can I do to adjust it? And I'll do passes until it feels like it's reading right.
What would you say broadly? Like, how many pages did you sort of reiterate 4, 5, 6 times?
As many of them as I can, to be honest.
Really? Okay.
I think it's just a part of me where I feel like if I don't do my due diligence in terms of exploring different ideas, how can I be truly sure that I've chosen the right one? And honestly, I think it's a little bit of insecurity. I don't know if it's necessarily a constructive thing all the time. And thankfully, sometimes time necessitates that I can't just do 7 different explorations on every page. So in general, I'll force myself to do a pass through once. And I'll be like, okay, it doesn't have to be good. Just do it. Just get from beginning to end, please.
Yeah.
So I'll do that. And then I'll go back in and be like, okay, which parts am I most unhappy with? Yeah. And I'm going to spend a couple of days just redoing those over and over until I feel better about them. And I'll do that essentially until I run out of time, or until Mike tells me to stop.
Well, I think as we mentioned before, having deadlines can be very good sometimes, because it actually makes you finish the work and not just play with it, forever. So let's go through. Let's finish this sequence, Ben, and get to. Okay, so that's what is this now?
So this is an example of the inks, just because I wanted to show kind of a few different stages of the process. So you saw the thumbs before. I do the thumbs, and then I actually don't have a pencil pass. I literally just scale those thumbs up onto my screen to full size, and I'll ink directly over the top of them. Because I find that if I do a pencil pass, the pencils end up super expressive, and then the inks pull the life out of them. So I find it works better for me to just do the ink straight on top, because then they are my pencil pass as well as the inks, and they tend to keep a bit more of the expression. Because I think I have a bit of a bad habit of polishing the life out of a sketch, and I kind of recognize that about myself, and so I'm trying to take steps to prevent that from happening. So I have thumb pass enlarged, and then over the top I'll do this kind of thing, which is the inks pass, and then from that Mike will take that into flats, which should be the next image on the slideshow.
Let's take it to the next page. Yeah.
So these are like flats, and from there it will go to the finished page, which I don't think we have in image flow, but I can show you it. Here.
Go back, man. Yeah.
So.
Right. So Michael, let me ask you a question about the flats. What are you doing, thinking when you make your color choices for a particular page?
Okay, that's a good question. When it comes to color, I'm always trying to think about what is the story of that page. What do I want? Whether there's an emotional feeling happening, or whether like I'm trying to set a mood or a time of day or something like that. And for this particular page, it's almost a dream sequency. So I wanted to go with something that kind of establishes an unstatus quo, so that we can break that in the next pages. And so in the top half of the page, I wanted to have like this isolated feeling for Bridgette. She's all in her own head at this moment, trying to go through her own feelings. And I'm not trying to make it too desaturated. I didn't want to like pull the color out, but it's more monotone. so that you kind of like, you have this quiet feeling over the top. And then in the bottom half of the page, I wanted to contrast that with warmth, because she's remembering things that were good for her. So have the contrast there. These are all bittersweet memories. So they have this kind of like lukewarmth, but not completely like idyllic. Still kind of like, in the final page, I think I keep every part where Bridgette's remembering herself in the memory, it links to the top part, because there's sadness in each of these. It's saying goodbye in 3 panels, just like boom, 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 and then black at the end. So it's got that, it's all those feelings that are unexplained, but I'm trying to like give you this feeling up front, so that when we hit this later in the story, you're like, oh, but you kind of have this overwhelming sense of melancholy here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Let me broaden that question. At what point are you doing your coloring? Are you doing it when the ink pass is basically all done for that section, or are you doing it in smaller chunks? In other words, how much canvas do you have to work on, I suppose would be how I would phrase that.
Yeah.
And Mike, you should talk a little bit as well about how you use color scripts in your coloring.
Yeah.
Because that's a holdover from animation.
So for the first kind of process on the book, as India was saying, we kind of set the date for Thought Bubble and had no book. So nothing gets the fire under your butt than a print deadline for an event.
Sure.
So that summer was very like, we were in the trenches. We had a book to make. And so it was almost like, you know, that there's a scene or like a moment in a Wallace and Gromit cartoon where Gromit's literally placing the tracks while he's on the front of the train. Thank you. So the first like self-published version was very much like India was inking the pages, passing me a page, and I was throwing down colors. But before that, the thumbnail pass had kind of been done. So I had the groundwork. So when I got the pages, I already had an idea in mind, and I knew the narrative arc and everything there. So as India was talking about, there's a thing in animation called a color script, and I pretty much stole that from the Pixar approach, because back in university, my animation mentor, he had all of these Art of Different Films books, and there's ones from The Incredibles, I think Finding Nemo, that sort of thing. And it was basically the way that they did it was they would lay out all of the panel, like all of the keyframes, and then put a color pass, but you could see it all at once, how the color language and the emotional storytelling would go throughout sequences, throughout scenes, throughout the whole movie. Sometimes they had like more in-depth one for a scene, or more like less in-depth, but you could see the whole movie in one page. And I was utterly fascinated by those. But at the time, it never clicked why. And it wasn't until later when I realized that when India and I worked on that Frostblight comic, we were making comic color scripts. Didn't know it at the time, but I remember putting my portfolio together, and I made a banner for my portfolio that had the whole comic in one page. And I took a step back, and I was like, we made a color script unintentionally, but this is what I want to do. So it always stuck with me then. Whenever I'm trying to approach color storytelling for a comic, I want that overview. I wanted to be able to take a step back and just see the whole thing. Because I think it's so important to know where you're moving from, what you're moving through, where you're going to, so that when you want your contrast or your page turns to be like really gut punch, that you know when that's happening where you're raising the temperature, where you're pulling out, and you're like, oh no, this place, you want to go from like this high to this low to this mid to this low, and there was something I was going to say there. I think that part of coloring and the color storytelling is what draws me towards comics, and what I try and do in anything I'm involved in. And then
that's great, because I think sort of traditionally in American comics, you know, things are done in such an assembly line fashion that there's not really time to consider the whole work, you know. I mean, you can set your palette and your tone for what you want to achieve with an issue, but I don't think that a lot of colors are like looking at the whole 22 pages, you know, or whatever, and think, because they've got to get the next page out, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I because I did some work in the past for Boom, I got the secret invite to a kind of group DM among colorists, and I pretty much just for the last 3 or 4 years just been reading like the like what their experiences have been on the different comics and stuff, and often they have to come in with pretty tight turnarounds to put books on the shelves, and I feel for them, because
often they're receiving pages one at a time or in small batches as well, right? So it's like they can't see ahead enough to be able to plan that stuff out.
Yeah, I really admire them for being able to just pull it together.
Yeah.
The secret life of the colorist. I like that. Give us the next page, will you, man? So what's the difference between the color on the previous page and this one is adding filters and such? Is that correct?
So this would be a finished page, I think, in the first part of the after the self-published one, and I just really particularly liked the way that the third panel came out. And yeah, this would be more adding the feeling of the light, like the light coming in the window, and it's not the flats. And because we kind of come from an animation background, I try and treat the panels as if they were an animated show.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to come at it with that sort of aesthetic intentionally. I think in future books, I have some plans where I might go a little heavier on the texture for the backgrounds, but keep the characters still that kind of like flat color pop.
Yeah, I think we decided to just embrace it, you know, because we knew that it was looking animated to begin with anyway. So we're like, hey, let's just lean into this and try and color it as though it's something you would see on TV.
That makes a ton of sense to me. What's the time difference between, say, doing the flats and then doing the sort of filtered finish coloring?
It's fairly close together.
Okay.
I think in this one, I was kind of working in batches, and they gave me finished pages.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean the closeness of the two processes. I meant how much time each one relatively takes. Like, so if it takes you an hour to flat a page, does it take you half an hour to filter it, or does it take you 2 hours to filter it?
Honestly, if I were to answer this question completely honestly,
go on.
Months. Because of indecision and decision making, and decision makings later down the line, where while I talked about having that overview, sometimes you just make a bad call and realize it later. And because this is a creator-owned book and like it was ours, I did put in the time that I had to try and just tweak it there, a revision there. I think with the time difference, emotionally, my head, I felt like I was trying to live up to myself, and that threw me through a whole loop.
Because you liked what you did in the first half of the book, and then you were like, can I live up to myself in second half, or have I lost it?
Where's the spark? And I think a lot of it is just chiseling away at the kind of monument in your head, because
Sure.
the book was fairly well received and we'd already received that feedback. It was kind of living in my own shadow. No one really tells you that as much as failure can knock you back, success can hold you down. And it's kind of like pushing through your own expectations of yourself can make the work harder.
Because at the beginning there were no expectations, right?
Yeah,
because
sure.
we were just, no one even knew it was going to exist. We were just making it for fun. So it was just like no risk, just a fun project. Then when it got picked up, we were like, oh man, this is going to be advertised, it's going to be out there, people are going to read it all over the world. We have to make it like really, really, really good. And there's like, there's something about that where it's like the pressure can sometimes be super scary when you're working on it and people are going to see it.
Yeah, well, there's also the difference, I suppose, between, you said you did 250 copies for the festival, and I'm sure the edition for this was 5,000 or 10,000 copies,
Yeah, somewhere between those two, yeah. So that was kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah. You give us the next slide, Ben. And just progress.
Yep. So this is an example of how we organize ourselves when we're working on these projects. So we'll make our own spreadsheets. They're pretty simple, but they basically help us to keep organized with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So just making sure we're checking off what stuff is done and adding any notes that like either one of us sees when we're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're working on a comic, it's so easy to lose track of stuff. Like, for example, in the second half of the book that I did for IDW, there was like 20 pages where I forgot to put Bridgette's backpack on her. And I had to go back through and be like, oh, I have to add this backpack onto all these poses. And like, I don't know how to do it. And it's getting in the way of the hair. It's like, hopefully you can't tell. But, it was like, we're up against the wire trying to get it done on time. It's like, oh my gosh, how did I forget this? But, it happens. So
I think it got into color. And that's where I was like.
Yeah, I didn't notice until Mike was coloring it, and then he saw it. Go ahead.
Oh, that's funny. So let's talk maybe just a little bit about the difference between doing a self-published book where you're your only editor and working with a publisher like IDW, where I don't know how heavy they were in in the last 70 pages, but I presume that they offered you an editor to perform editorial services for you, essentially.
Yes, they did.
So what was the difference for you as a creator between those two different ways of producing?
It was nice, honestly. Like it was very nice to have someone who wasn't Mike or I, because Mike's been living with me talking about this idea to him and at him for like the past 4 years or something. So he knows it inside out. So honestly, it was just really nice to have someone read it who was like, their job is to read comics and to tell you if things don't make sense, to tell you how the story is coming across, whether they have any concerns with characters or anything. It was like a wonderful litmus test to have someone read that and then be able to give us like their honest, objective viewpoint of it, and to not say, oh, this is awful, you should never have made this, what were you thinking? So always very encouraging when someone's like, I like this is good. And the feedback that we got from, because we initially were working with Chase, and then later we switched over to Zach Boone being our editor. So Zach Boone was our editor for kind of the latter half of the book when it came out. And they both always gave very, very good advice. And yeah, it was just nice to have like a sounding board to kind of stress test ideas against through the process, to be like, hey, does this work, or am I like, does it only work because I've been sat with it for 2 weeks and I've convinced myself it does, or does it actually work?
Were there things in the first half, the first 50 pages, that they suggested get changed?
Yeah, there were a couple of wording things, because we live in England, the slang here is completely different.
Sure.
So there were some things which characters were saying which just like they either wouldn't read over in the States, or like they would be misinterpreted, you know, in the States, sometimes in potentially negative ways, and we're like, oh well, we don't want that. So that was really helpful to know as well. So yeah, there was a few script tweaks here and there.
But no redrawing?
Yeah, a little bit of redrawing, but that was mainly because Mike and I inserted a character into the second part of the book that we thought would be very important to help tell the story of how Bridgette comes to the decisions that she's going to go on this adventure and help the town and fight monsters, essentially, which is what the book becomes as you go through it.
Yeah.
And we wanted to see that character in earlier, and essentially the editor just like agreed and was like, yeah, you should see this character in earlier. And so we ended up weaving that character back through the earlier part of the book. So that was one of the changes we've made that required some redrawing, but luckily it wasn't too intensive, and I think we all agreed that it made for a better story, so it was 100% worth it.
Yeah, great. No, that's fantastic. And everything's completely digital, so it's not necessarily hard to make those kind of changes.
Yes. I would honestly love to try doing it traditionally, because there's just something about having a pen in your hand and like the texture of the paper and just sitting, you know, with some podcasts on or something and getting down to drawing traditionally, that is just this irreplaceable feeling. There's kind of a magic about it. But I won't lie, it is faster for me to do digital, and it does make changes easier. And definitely when I went back through and needed to do some drawing adjustments, I was very happy that I could just open the file and very cleanly erase things and adjust things.
Yeah.
Back when India was working on the earlier one, there was some really beautiful watercolors that she was doing of like character concepts, and I think we had a few of those originals for sale back when we were tabling, back before, you know, the break. And we were in an event where Stan Sakai was there as well, and he's just quietly going around, and he kind of like walks over to our table, picks up a couple of original watercolors and asks for them, and India like gives him the price, and he's just like, oh, so low. And then hands over the money and gives us an Asagi badge and just walks off. And I
He
think
was
we
so
both
nice.
we're like, was that Stan Sakai?
We were both like geeking out completely.
Yeah, no, he's such a sweet man. I really,
nice dude.
Yeah, I really like him a lot. Yeah, and so goddamn talented. It always impresses me that, you know, people who have. I always love people who have been able to make a career of this for 30 years and done it their way and not had to compromise and been able to make the art that they want. You know, it's not easier in comics because comics don't necessarily have the same reward, you know, at the end of the day, but there's a power to it that I like a lot, you know. So, and again, when you can go back and you can look at the difference between Usagi Book 1 and what he's doing today, you know, and you can just watch his evolution as an artist, you know, to bring it to our earlier point. That's fantastic.
It's hugely inspiring.
Yeah,
he was lovely. He went to do a talk and then afterwards just went around all the indie tables and just supported all the indie artists there, which was just like, what a great guy. Yeah, and he's right that when you have original art, you shouldn't undersell it. I mean, it's one of the things. It's one of the reasons that working traditionally can often be nice as well. You know, because you have originals that you can sell later down the line. You know. You know, I think you mentioned that there's going to be more of these books. You know, at some point, it you know, having the original artwork from the first it becomes something. You know. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've got to imagine too, this must be something like very satisfying when you're making comics to kind of finish off a bulk of pages and be able to see a physical stack of paper next to you where you're like, okay, these are the pages I've done.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think so as well. Ben, are there some questions? I see you have the question bar open. I'm just wondering if any of those are things that or if they're just people talking to each other. Hey, it's Jason Thomas Brown. Hello, Jason Thomas
Hey,
Brown.
Jason.
In an ideal world, how many books would you want to have for the girl in the GLIM?
Oh, more than I should be allowed to make, probably. Yeah, I mean, I personally am like I'm a huge fan of kind of Monster of the Week stories, and so in an ideal world, I would love to just extend the middle part of the story of Girl in the GLIM, and like really explore the town and really explore the characters and do lots of Monster of the Week type stuff. I feel like I'm probably gonna be encouraged to try and wrap the story up in a more satisfying way in maybe 5 or so books, but I would love to have, 30 volumes, something ridiculous and bonkers that will probably take the rest of my life to make. But I just feel like there's a lot of storytelling that goes on in my head that I want to get on the page, and I hope that I get the opportunity to do it. Even in a small part would make me very happy.
That's fantastic. No, I'd love to see that too. And look, I mean, Stan Sakai got 5,000 pages plus out of Samurai Rabbit.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. If he can do it, then why not me?
Exactly. Was there anything else? That was it for audience questions? All right. Well, we're here for a few more minutes if you have questions, folks, so we can do them. So maybe let's talk a little about the page turn. This page turn is kind of one of my favorite parts of comics. That because you're leading the audience through the work, that emotional beat, on the right hand page, it becomes is really important. So tell us about your process with it.
Basically, my process with it was being like, okay, which moments do I want to hit the hardest in this book? What's the moment where I want people to like gasp when they turn the page, and I want it to have an impact and be a moment that people remember, because like any tool, there's a consequence to overusing it, where if every page turn is a page turn moment,
sure,
it loses the impact. But
sure.
Yeah, so I have a couple of moments in there where it's like there's a moment where there's a horror moment. Where I kind of want to deliver a bit of a scare to readers. So I've hidden that behind a page turn, and I've also made that a double page spread to try and like further increase the impact of turning the page and then getting this spread of this image before you. And then there's another moment where it's more of a moment of reveal and victory. So there are several different ways that you can use it, which is one of the wonderful things in itself. You can even use it for happy moments, which I haven't done yet, but which I have a few ideas for. But yeah, like moments of horror, moments of shock, moments of reveal, hiding those things behind page turns, there's something kind of magical about that reveal when readers see it.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a lady who came to our table when we were originally tabling at Thought Bubble, who accidentally opened the page on the page turn and went, "Oh no, oh my gosh," and immediately closed the book and put it back down. We were like, oh well. I mean, at least it did its job of being a little bit spooky. But yeah, so hopefully those land for people. And if you read the book and it lands for you, then let us know, because we'd love to hear if it kind of hit people or not.
Yeah, no, I thought your storytelling was very strong, and despite the obvious animation influence, it's very clear to me that you're thinking about the page as a page, and it's not just a storyboard. Unfortunately, there's too many comics that get made these days, which are clearly pitches for movies.
Yes,
and you can see it on the page. I particularly think that a page like this one, where the GLIM comes and she's batting it with the board, and you're using how the eye tracks through multiple panels. Like that's a really strong page in terms of storytelling and in terms of figuring out sort of how the visual language of comics works.
Thank you. That was a really fun one to do. It's great when you get moments like that where you can be like, what can I do to make this kind of abstract and fun and different to the other moments in the book?
I think that was one of the rules that you had for yourself in the book, is that the creatures like the GLIM are the only ones that India is allowing to break panel, so that they kind of feel out of the world just a little bit. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, like it's fun in storytelling to kind of develop your own rule sets and limitations for your art that try and kind of push the idea of the story or the feel of your story forward. So that was one of the ones I had, which is just that the only things that can break panel borders in this world, in this comic, are supernatural elements.
Yeah.
To make them feel like they're not part of, this constrained world inside the panels.
Yeah. And again, this is something that you very much could not do in animation. There's not a way to break the border.
Yes, yes, exactly. And there's a part in a future book where I want a lot of noise to be happening in the background of an event that's happening. And you can do that with, onomatopoeic sound effects in comics. If you put that on a screen, that would be a difficult 10 minutes to watch of a constant cacophony of sound.
Sure. So the lettering, what is did you guys do the lettering yourself, or did you farm that out to someone else?
We have a pal called Hassan Otsmain Alhal, who is a fantastic letterer. And I highly recommend, if anyone watching out there wants to do comics themselves, or is just really interested in learning about the language of comics, then Hassan has this incredible YouTube show called Strip Panel Naked, in which he basically just looks at a different book every episode, and he'll go into the language of the comic and how they use visuals or how they use lettering, and really delve into the different ways that they tell the story. And it's like incredible analytical stuff, and it's really helpful if you're making your own comics to kind of see the possibilities. So he's like, not only is he a great letterer, he's a huge comic geek. Like, he loves dissembling the storytelling and looking into it. So I highly recommend for people to follow Hassan. He's on Twitter, he's on YouTube, if you want to catch any of that. He even does a monthly magazine that he puts together, which does interviews with comic artists. Do you remember what it's called, Mike?
Panel by panel.
Panel by panel.
Sorry.
And that's great. So yeah, he's really active in the comics community, and he's just a really good letterer. I really hope we can get him for future books, because he makes decisions in the book that I think really help bring the voice of the characters out. So it was 100% his decision to give all the characters different colored speech bubbles and color code that to each of the characters, which is really helpful when a character is speaking from off screen, and you want to know who's speaking without needing to exposition name drop in there. So there's a couple of times when someone speaks from off screen, and you can tell who it is because Hassan's chosen different character colors for everybody. And so just the color of the speech bubble alone gives you the character's voice. So it's really cool stuff.
How much did he work with you, Michael, on making those decisions? And were there places that those decisions came in conflict for what your natural thought of the color on the page was?
I think there were some instances where we were working in parallel, and so when he was working, he might have been working with the inks rather than the final colors. But usually when we found a moment where it was like, this is going to blend in a little bit too much, or this is going to get lost a little, we found instances. I think he tried to compensate it with like a drop shadow, and I was like, no, you just keep your theming. I'll change it because it's more important that that's communicated there than it is for me to have that particular shade of yellow or cream or something. And I think there were few and far between instances of that. I think it is good to be mindful, though, like in future books, like what our color themings are, so that I can kind of move forward, because there were characters added in the second part that hadn't had color themings yet. And I think there are instances where I was like, I will change that going forward. So that's a really interesting, good question. Because I think there's a couple of instances where I'm like, oh, I didn't catch that the speech bubble maybe needs a little bit. I need to check that, but you live and learn.
Yeah.
Our editor now is like, no changes unless it's broken. And I was like, okay.
No more changes. Like, oh, can we just tweak this little? No, stop.
I remember me and Hassan being awake at like 2 or 3 a.m. and he was like, "It's fine. I'm watching the NFL." And like he was watching American football playing, and we were just like passing files back and forth. That's when the print deadline was like, here you go. We actually got the first iteration of the book printed with Comic Printing UK, and we've now become sort of like on friendly terms with Rich there, who prints the comics. Like he comes around Thought Bubble and is like, hey, hello, and he'll like buy comics from us, and like he claims, and I believe him, but he's just like that our book is one of his favorite that he's ever printed.
Oh.
But I'm sure
he says that to all the comic artists, you know.
But like, I think the first time he turned up at our table, he looked like this rock star.
Yeah, he's a complete rock star. He like, he's got like, you know, long hair, sunglasses, you know, black painted nails. He's wearing all black. Super cool dude.
Nice. I love it. How about the sound effects and the onomatopoeia kind of bits? Are those did Hassan do those, or did you do them, India, in the art?
It was kind of 50-50. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I had a really strong idea for something really specific I wanted, in which case I would just go ahead and do it. Mm-hmm. But for everything else, I generally put in the script and then Hassan would take care of it. And if there was anything where I was like, oh, I don't know if this feels right, we would back and forth on it a bit. So we ended up with kind of a blend of both our styles in there.
Yeah, because I imagine that when you have a giant boom, you know, behind an explosion, that's something that you're going to want to do as the artist, right?
Yeah. Oh, I think, was that one actually Has?
That was Has.
Has. That one. That's just how good he is. Like, the thing with Has is that he's never scared to like get the lettering into the art and integrate it, which is one of the things that I think is like a real strength with him.
Yeah.
Is, you know, he will go in and he'll loop it between shapes and he'll integrate it into the background, and it's just like that extra little attention to detail that I think makes all the difference, gives it like real flavor and texture in the book.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would say now that you've got a completed book in hand that you wish you had known before you started?
Oh my gosh, everything! Are you kidding me? Everything. I'm learning something every day where I'm like, oh man, I wish I'd known that earlier. Let me think if there's anything like broad and sweeping. Yeah, I think if I could go back and redo, I might change the pacing of the beginning of the book just a little bit. I think one of the things I wish I'd done as well was comics is such a, it's not something that you can focus half your brain on. And I was hoping that I could back when I was working on multiple projects at the same time. But I really wish that I would have booked myself a really solid gap and break to work on the book in. Because I think it would have benefited me to be able to like really get my head into just one thing and one space. So this is what I'm hoping to do with the next book, is I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, which is it will be less stressful. It will be, hopefully, I'll be able to really steep myself in the world of the book, to not try and juggle multiple projects at the same time, but instead just focus on this one thing. So I guess the thing I learned is that any art, comics included, is like a sponge. It will absorb as much time as you give it, like the more time you pour onto it, the more it's going to absorb, and it will never be full. So just you have to find a space for it that you feel comfortable in feeling like you're going to be able to make your best work, I think. And I'm still very proud of what we did for book 1, but I'm also very excited to see what we can do for book 2. Now that I can take that lesson forward and be like, okay, I know what we can do to push this next time.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna see how it goes and go for it, and hopefully it will be something special.
Where are you in the process of book 2? Have you started like plotting out plots and scheming schemes?
I have. I've been a scheming.
Yeah.
I'm in thumbnails, or just started thumbnails. And basically the entire plot of the whole story is mapped out. I know exactly how it's going to end. I know exactly what's going to happen in the middle. I know everything that's happening in this story. The thing which I don't know yet is how it's going to happen. And that's the fun of the thumbnail stage, is working out how to tell that story.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where I'm at the minute. I'm very excited for some of the moments that are coming up.
And it's also going to be coming from IDW? Is that the plan?
It is the plan currently.
Yeah.
Until someone says otherwise, that's the plan. So fingers crossed.
Another 120 pages, is that?
We're hoping we can push it a bit longer this time, because there's a fairly sizable chunk of story to tell with the next book. I want to make sure that I can get it all in and not have to compromise and not have to split it into separate books. So we're hoping that we can maybe do 240 or something.
Nice.
I mean, I haven't got approval from IDW for this.
Sure.
So
I understand.
they may say, maybe not, but I can ask, and we'll see what they say. And I'm sure either way we'll be able to work something out with it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to at least push, I think, for if we can get 140, 150, that'd be great. Just those extra few pages. Yeah, I'm sure it's an issue of just like, you never want the second volume of the book to have to be priced much higher than the first, because it's Harry Potter levels of chunkiness past what the first book was. But I mean, the more pages they give me to tell the story, I'm perfectly happy to fill those pages, essentially.
Yeah, no, and I think the fact that it's already gone to a second printing, that was fast too. I mean, that's like 2 months. I mean, I'm sure our buying the copies for the club helped, but
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You guys are
my pleasure, my pleasure. But that's really great, and that's really satisfying that you're going back for more, and I think that's really fantastic. So you kind of jokingly said that you wouldn't mind having 30 books, but like, what do you have, like an actual plan of like, have you started pondering what the next couple of things are going to be?
Yes. At the minute, 5 is my actual plan.
Okay.
And then I'll hopefully, if the next book does really well, then IDW will be like, that's my plan. So 5, hopefully 30.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great. Are you working on this full time, or are you still doing the animation as your primary way of making a living?
At the minute.
Okay.
I'm planning to carve that space out for it. There's a few things that we're just waiting for the go-ahead on, and then it'll be full steam ahead. But I'm just keeping busy in the meantime by like making progress on, the book of the thumbnails and everything. Yeah. I'm doing a little bit of freelance on the side.
Yeah. Do you see a place where you can do comics full time?
Yeah, I think so. I think the ultimate dream for me would be kind of to do a kind of 6 months on a comic, 6 months on animation type thing. Because I love them both so much. My heart is kind of split between the two. So to be able to do that, where I could have 6 months just dedicated to, hey, let's get another volume like mostly put together and get the bulk of the work done, and then to have 6 months where I could be freelancing or working on some kind of series or a movie would be like, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Maybe, and who knows? Maybe someday there'll be an animation of the girl in the GLIM, right?
Maybe. Mike and I are working on an animated trailer for it, so
very
look
nice.
out for that
Okay.
at some point. Us and some very skilled, very generous friends who are helping us put it together.
Nice. Would that be like what? Just like a minute of animation, 90 seconds or something?
Yeah, like at the minute it's 40 seconds even.
Okay.
But we've been a bit ambitious with it. So some of the shots are quite complicated, but it's very fun to do. So yeah, at the minute we have about, I'd say, 20 seconds of it done and about another 20 seconds to go to finish it up completely. So hopefully you'll be seeing that in the next couple of months.
Yeah. And is there a targeted date when we're going to see book 2 of The Girl in the GLIM?
I would love to say, I mean, we haven't set anything in stone yet, so there's not 100% date on it. But at the minute, it's looking like, though we would very much like to do it for next year, I think by the time we'd finish it, it might be quite late in the year. And I think a summer release is probably what IDW would prefer, just because it would coincide with the school season and everything. So it might get pushed to the year after, but we'll see. And I'll keep my fingers crossed that it can come out as soon as possible.
When you're actually in the process of let's say by the time you get to the inking stage, you've done a lot of the hard work breaking down the thumbnails. But like, what's your level of production? Page a day, more, less?
I am capable of doing 2 pages a day, inking, though that is it's very tight a timeline for me. So I was kind of doing that when I was running out of time, and I was very much like really micromanaging myself at that point. So what I would do when I was up against the deadline and having a hard time getting everything done is I would look at my thumbnails and on the page, and I would give each one an assigned time limit that I had to ink it, and I would chalk them both into 4 hours a page. So I would have maybe like the first panel would be 40 minutes, second panel would be 10 minutes, third panel would be like an hour. And I'd make sure that each page would cap out at 4 hours. And then when I would work on it, I would keep myself to that with a timer on the computer. When I'm not doing that, it can take me anywhere between a day or a day and a half to do a page. That's like more of my natural pace.
Understood. That sounds great. Well, I know I can speak for all the kids members of the club that we can't wait to see more of this.
Thank you.
This is, I mean, really, this book was a lot of fun. It has a lot of heart, and it's really human, which is important. So I love it, and I can't wait till we get more. And normally what's coming up next would be the next to last question, but we've already answered that. So let's jump to the final question. We have a lot of people who watch these series of shows who want to do comics themselves. They don't necessarily know what to do or how to start or what's the best way to make comics, the quote unquote best way. I'm putting air quotes there. What would be the piece of advice that you would give to an aspiring cartoonist? It can be, it can be a practical thing. It can be a philosophical thing. It can be an emotional thing. What do you got?
I would say that my personal piece of advice, and I'll pass it over to Mike in a minute because I'm sure he's got his own thoughts on this as well, is to not be intimidated out of starting it by feeling like you have to do it a certain way or you have to be at a certain artistic level to start doing it. Do it your own way, because if there's anything that I've learned through my years of working in animation and working in comics now, it's that everybody works completely differently, And there isn't really any right way to do it. There's just like, there's a different path for every single person. So work in the way that makes you feel comfortable and work in a way which you feel gets your best work out there. And do not be intimidated if you don't feel ready or you don't feel like your art's good enough, because the very process of making a comic book is going to improve your work and make you good enough. Like, it's not that you have to wait to be a certain level to start, it's that starting will get you to that level. So go for it and have fun.
I love that
Mike,
answer. That's great. Michael, what do you got? Add to this, change it, subtract it, come up with something new. What do you got?
I would say that in anything that you want to pursue, you have to have an internal why. If you're going to start making comics, you got to start making comics for you, because I think as soon as you start to put external validation on what you're doing, that's just unnecessary resistance that you don't need as part of your creative process. So I really liked India's earlier thing about how she was making GLIM for herself to read when she needed it.
Yeah.
I would just say, if you want to be making comics that you want to read for you.
Yeah.
And don't worry about who your audience are, because if you're making comics for yourself, you'll discover who is like you, who wants to read that as well by making it. So
Yeah.
I would just say, don't worry about how who's going to like your comic or who's going to read your comic. Field dreams it, build it,
Yeah.
and they will come.
Very much so.
And I think it's really important that fire is internal, that you can be just in a room making comics, giggling to yourself, reading them back to yourself, and that it's what you want to be doing. Because if you're making comics for fame, acclaim, money, every single day you don't get any of those, and you will feel like you're not living up to something. Yeah. And all of that stuff is rubbish compared to the joy you can get of just simply making something that just inspires you or makes you want, like, remember the feeling you got from reading a comic that made you want to make comics? That's it. That's the secret ingredient. That's what you want in your own stuff, and you'll get that by just focusing on making what it is you want to be reading.
I love that answer. I think that's a fantastic answer. And I want to thank both of you for being here and taking part. Ben, you want to put me on a one? I want to say to everybody who's sitting at home, if you're sitting at home and you don't know what to read, you're looking for a good book, you're looking for something with heart, with humanity, that's beautiful. I mean, you've seen some examples here, that we put up pages. It is a gorgeous book, and it's got a lot of heart. So get a copy of the Girl in the Glim. You can buy it from us, of course. We've got copies that we're happy to sell you, but go buy a copy of it. Generally, it's a really good book. I want to also mention that our next show coming immediately is on Wednesday. It's for the adult club, not for the kids club. And the book will be What's the Furthest Place from Here? We've got Tyler Boss and Matthew Rosenberg who are going to be here, and that should be a lively conversation, I'm expecting. I think we're going to talk a lot about sort of the economy of making comics, and a lot of really interesting thoughts in there. So, but tune in on Wednesday for that. Next month's kids show, it's a little younger than we usually do for a book, but this one had so much heart and so much charm. It's Expedition Backyard, Rosemary Moscow and Binglin Hugh. And they're going to be in about a month from now. So keep a watch out for this one. You guys all loved Bug Boys, so we think you're going to really love this one as well. I think that is it for me. Oh, I want to do some thank yous. I want to thank Ben for running the camera and doing all the shots and everything. Thank you so much, my son. I want to thank Jordan, our producer, for dealing with all the backstage stuff that none of you see, but he takes care of it. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Zoe and Kat and Katie for being my staff and being so good at what they do that I'm able to sit here in front of a camera and just kind of talk with cartoonists about making comics. Because I couldn't do it if they weren't doing such a good job of running the store. I want to thank every one of you who are members of the club. It's what keeps the stores going. It what allows us to keep this program going, and you get fantastic books for it too. I want to thank all you subscribers as well. You can hit that little bell thing up in the top corner, whichever corner it is, one of those corners. So thank you for that. But consider being a member of the club because it actually supports us. And you get good books too. And most of all, I want to thank cartoonists like India right here, and Michael, who we can't see, but is standing there. Yay, his hand, yay! So I want to thank you guys for making such a good book, because we couldn't do this without you. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, and we really hope that all the club members enjoy the book. You guys rock and are awesome. Thank you so much.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, we'll see you next month, everybody. Thanks very much for watching this episode of the Kids Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were seeing, please subscribe and hit the bell up in the corner. We'd like to invite you to join the club. Every month you'll get a great new book curated by our staff, and it's a fantastic program. So please join. That address is running along the bottom right now. Thanks very much.